July 24, 1943. 180 feet beneath the Philippine Sea. Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton grips the periscope handles of USS Wahoo so tightly his knuckles turn white. Through the lens, he can see her a Japanese freighter, fat with supplies, wallowing in the water like a prize waiting to be claimed. 8,000 tons of steel, fuel, and ammunition destined for Imperial forces in the Solomon Islands. His crew has stalked her for 6 hours, maneuvering into the perfect firing position. The ocean is calm. The angle is textbook. Everything is right. "Fire one," Morton says, his voice steady. The submarine shudders as the Mark 14 torpedo launches from its tube, a mechanical thunk that reverberates through the hull. Every man aboard holds his breath. 46 seconds. That's how long it takes at this range. Morton counts them off in his head, watching through the periscope as the torpedo's wake cuts across the surface, a white scar racing toward the target. 46 seconds pass. Nothing. The freighter sails on, oblivious. Morton's jaw clenches. "Fire two!" Another shudder, another wake, another 46 seconds of hope draining into frustration. The torpedo passes directly beneath the freighter's keel. No explosion, just the hollow sound of failure echoing through the submarine's compartments. Fire three, fire four. By the time Morton empties half his torpedo room, the freighter has realized something is hunting it. Black smoke pours from its stacks as it turns hard to port, zigzagging away. The Japanese destroyer that was escorting it begins pinging active sonar, searching. Wahoo dives deep, silent, while Morton stares at the bulkhead, his face a mask of barely contained rage. This is the third patrol in a row. The third time the Mark 14 has betrayed him. The Mark 14 torpedo was supposed to be America's ace. In the hole, a secret weapon developed in the depths of the Great Depression, packed with a magnetic influence exploder that would detonate beneath enemy hulls, breaking their keels without even making contact. On paper, it was revolutionary. In reality, it was a catastrophe dressed up as innovation. The problems were legion. The torpedoes ran too deep, passing harmlessly beneath their targets. The magnetic exploders triggered prematurely, detonating in the Earth's magnetic field. When submariners switched to contact mode, the firing pins crumpled on impact instead of detonating. And when everything else worked, the torpedoes sometimes circled back toward the submarines that launched them, turning hunters into prey. But the Bureau of Ordnance Bureau, the Navy Department responsible for weapons, refused to admit there was a problem. For 2 years, submarine commanders sent report after report documenting failures. They described watching torpedoes hit enemy ships and bounce off. They documented premature explosions, duds, and circular runs that nearly killed their own crews. Board's response was always the same. The torpedoes were fine. The problem was operator error. Submarine skippers knew better. In Pearl Harbor, commanders gathered in secret, comparing notes, documenting failures that Bureau refused to acknowledge. They ran unauthorized tests, dropping torpedoes from cranes to prove the firing pins were defective. They jury-rigged fixes in the field, deactivating the magnetic exploders and adjusting depth settings based on guesswork and prayer. And they died. Not always from enemy action, but from the betrayal of their own weapons. USS Tang was sunk by one of her own torpedoes that circled back. USS Tullabee met the same fate. How many other submarines vanished because their torpedoes gave away their positions with premature explosions or failed to sink targets that then called in destroyer escorts? By mid-1943, American submarines had the best crews, the best training, and the best tactical position in naval history, operating in Japanese home waters against an enemy desperate for supplies. But they were fighting with weapons that worked perhaps 50% of the time. The Japanese merchant fleet continued sailing, keeping the Empire's war machine fed, while American submariners risked their lives firing torpedoes that might as well have been blanks. Commander Morton survived his patrol and returned to Pearl Harbor with a report full of profanity that Buard couldn't ignore. Other commanders did the same. The pressure mounted. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Submarine Force Pacific, finally had enough evidence to force Buard's hand. Tests were conducted. Problems were confirmed. Fixes were implemented. But fixing the Mark 14 was like putting a bandage on a gangrenous limb. Even with modifications, it was still a steam-powered weapon that left a visible wake, announcing the submarine's position to every destroyer and aircraft in the area. And by 1943, the Japanese were getting very good at hunting submarines. What the U.S. Navy needed wasn't a better version of a failed weapon. They needed something completely different. Something silent. Something deadly. Something that would give American submarines the edge they'd been promised, but never delivered. They needed the Mark 18. June 4th, 1944. Naval Torpedo Station, Newport, Rhode Island. Lieutenant Commander James Jim Fife stands in a restricted warehouse, staring at a weapon that shouldn't exist in American hands. It's a German G-7E torpedo, pulled from U-505, a Type 1C U-boat captured intact off the coast of West Africa just days ago. The boarding party had risked everything to seize the submarine before its crew could scuttle her. And now American engineers are tearing her apart, cataloging every secret the Kriegsmarine tried to hide. But this torpedo is the crown jewel. Fife runs his hand along the weapon's smooth casing. It's cold to the touch, painted in German gray-green, and it looks deceptively simple. No external pipes, no complicated steam engine, just a sleek tube of death that runs on electricity. He's seen the intelligence reports. He knows what this weapon can do. The Germans call it the G-7E, an electric torpedo that leaves no wake, makes almost no noise, and has been sending Allied ships to the bottom of the Atlantic since 1940. How many ships have we lost to these? Fife asks the engineer beside him. The engineer, a graying civilian named Theodore Westphal, doesn't look up from his clipboard. Conservative estimate 300, maybe more. The Brits have been screaming for us to develop something similar since 1941. So why haven't we? Westphal finally meets his eyes. Because Buard said it couldn't be done. Said electric torpedoes were too slow, too short-ranged, too unreliable. Said the Germans were wasting their time. He pats the torpedo like it's an old friend. Turns out the Germans knew what they were doing. The captured G-7E was a revelation. But it wasn't a complete surprise. American intelligence had known about German electric torpedoes for years. What they hadn't known was how well they worked. The G-7E could run at 30 knots for 5 kilometers, powered by a massive lead-acid battery that drove a quiet electric motor. More importantly, it left no wake, no telltale white streak to give away the U-boat's position. In the Atlantic, this was a game-changer. Allied convoy escorts could spot steam-powered torpedo wakes from miles away, giving them precious seconds to evade or counterattack. But electric torpedoes were ghosts. The first warning a ship's crew had was the explosion tearing through their hull. By the time they realized they were under attack, the U-boat that killed them was already gone. Slipping away in silence, the U.S. Navy had actually begun developing its own electric torpedo before the war. The Mark 18 but the program had been plagued by the same bureaucratic inertia that cursed the Mark 14. Board insisted electric torpedoes were impractical, too expensive, too complicated, too slow. The program limped along with minimal funding while submarines went to war with weapons that didn't work. The capture of U-505 changed everything. Suddenly, American engineers had a working example to study. They could see how the Germans solved the battery problem, how they managed the motor, how they kept the weapon stable without the gyroscopic forces of a steam turbine. More importantly, they could prove to Board that electric torpedoes weren't just feasible, they were superior. Westphal and his team worked around the clock, reverse engineering the G7E and incorporating its lessons into the Mark 18 design. They couldn't simply copy the German weapon American manufacturing standards. Materials and specifications were different, but they could steal the principles that made it work. The Mark 18 that emerged from Newport was faster than its German cousin, with a range of 4,000 yards at 29 knots. And like the G7E, it was whisper quiet and wakeless. By August 1943, the first production, Mark 18s were rolling out of factories in Alexandria, Virginia, and Forest Park, Illinois. They weren't perfect early models, had battery problems and depth-keeping issues, but they worked. More importantly, they worked reliably, which was something American submariners hadn't experienced in 2 years of war. September 12, 1943. Pearl Harbor Submarine Base. Commander Richard O'Kane stands on the dock beside USS Tang, watching as a crane lowers the first Mark 18 torpedoes into his submarine's forward torpedo room. The weapons look almost identical to Mark 14s from the outside, but O'Kane knows the difference. He's read the reports. He's talked to the test crews. These torpedoes don't betray the men who fire them. His executive officer, Lieutenant Frazee, appears at his elbow. What do you think? Skipper, trust them. O'Kane watches another torpedo disappear into Tang's hull. I trust them more than I trusted the 14s. That's not saying much, but it's a start. He turns to Frazee, and there's something almost hungry in his expression. You know what this means. No wake, no trail leading back to us. We can fire from closer range, hit harder, and be gone before they know what killed them. If they work, Frazee says. Yeah, if they work. The first combat deployment of the Mark 18 came in September 1943 aboard USS Tuna during a patrol near the Mariana Islands. Commander John Dettar fired 4 Mark 18s at a Japanese transport, and all 4 hit. The ship broke in half and sank in less than 3 minutes. The escorting destroyers never saw the torpedo wakes. They never knew where the attack came from. They circled helplessly, pinging with active sonar, searching for a submarine that was already 5 miles away. Dettar's report was 4 pages of unrestrained enthusiasm. The torpedoes ran true. They ran at the proper depth. They exploded on contact with devastating effect. And most importantly, they didn't give away Tuna's position. For the first time in the war, an American submarine skipper could fire with confidence instead of prayer. Word spread through the submarine force like wildfire. Skippers who had learned to distrust their weapons suddenly had something they could rely on. The Mark 18 wasn't just an improvement, it was a transformation. It turned American submarines from frustrated hunters into silent killers. But the real test was coming. Because by late 1943, Japan's merchant fleet was still afloat, still supplying the empire's far-flung garrisons, still keeping the war machine running. The Japanese Navy knew American submarines were hunting them. They developed convoy tactics, improved their sonar, and deployed more escorts. They thought they'd adapted to the threat. They had no idea what was coming. January 30th, 1944. 200 miles east of Formosa. Taiwan Strait. Commander Slade Cutter peers through the periscope of USS Seahorse, watching a sight that makes his pulse quicken. A Japanese convoy, 7 freighters, 3 tankers, and 4 destroyer escorts arranged in a defensive formation that would have made any submarine skipper cautious 6 months ago. The destroyers are pinging constantly, their sonar sweeping the water in overlapping patterns. The merchant ships steam in 2 parallel columns, zigzagging every 8 minutes to throw off any submarine that might be plotting an attack. It's a textbook defensive formation, and it's about to become a killing field. Cutter doesn't need to worry about the destroyers spotting his torpedo wakes. He's carrying 16 Mark 18s. When he fires, the only warning the Japanese will have is the sound of exploding hulls. He keys the intercom. "Tracking party, this is the captain. I'm going to fire a 6-torpedo spread. Target is the lead freighter in the port column. Stand by." In the conning tower, his fire control team works with practiced efficiency, feeding ranges, speeds, and angles into the mechanical computer that calculates firing solutions. Cutter watches through the periscope as the convoy slides into the perfect position. The lead freighter is enormous, probably 12,000 tons, sitting low in the water with a full cargo load. Behind it, 3 more merchants steam in line. "Solution set, skipper," his executive officer reports. Cutter takes one last look. The morning sun glints off the water. The destroyers are a mile away, focused on the wrong sector. Everything is perfect. Fire 1, fire 2, fire 3, fire 4, fire 5, fire 6. Seahorse shudders with each launch, expelling 6 Mark 18 torpedoes in rapid succession. They leave the tubes at 3-second intervals, spreading out in a fan pattern designed to ensure at least one hit even if the target maneuvers. Cutter stays at the periscope, counting seconds. The torpedoes are running at 29 knots. Range is 1,800 yards. Time to impact just over a minute. No one in the convoy sees them coming. The first torpedo hits the lead freighter amidships, the explosion tearing through the engine room. The ship lurches to port, black smoke erupting from her deck. 3 seconds later, the second torpedo hits just after the bridge. The third catches her near the bow. The combined explosions break the ship's back. She's sinking before her crew even realizes they're under attack. But Cutter isn't watching the first target anymore. The 4th and 5th torpedoes have continued past the lead ship, tracking toward the second freighter in line. Both hit within seconds of each other. One in the forward hold, the other in the stern. The ship seems to lift out of the water, then breaks in half. The 6th torpedo misses, running between the 2nd and 3rd ships. But Cutter is already lining up his next shot. "Come right to course 270. Reload all tubes. We're going back in." On the surface, the Japanese convoy is in chaos. The 2 lead freighters are sinking, one already gone beneath the waves, the other settling fast with her bow pointing skyward. The destroyer escorts are racing around, pinging frantically, searching for an enemy they can't find. There are no torpedo wakes to trace back to a source. No periscope sightings, just sudden, catastrophic explosions coming from nowhere. The convoy scatters. The remaining ships break formation, each captain making the desperate calculation that staying together just makes them easier targets. The destroyers try to form a screen, but they're guarding against an enemy whose position they can only guess. One destroyer races over the spot where Cutter fired from, but Seahorse is already half a mile away, moving quietly on electric motors, preparing for the next attack. February 3rd, 1944. The same waters, 4 days later. The Japanese think they've figured it out. After losing 16 ships in the Taiwan Strait in less than a week. Imperial Navy Command has issued new orders. Convoys will travel only at night, with destroyers forming a tight circular screen. Aircraft will patrol ahead during daylight hours. Any submarine contacts will be hunted to exhaustion. They're adapting, but they're adapting to the wrong threat. Commander Eugene Fluckey commands USS Barb, and he's been tracking a 10-ship convoy since sunset. The Japanese are doing everything right, maintaining strict radio silence, using unpredictable course changes, keeping their escorts close. The destroyer screen is so tight that Fluckey can't penetrate it without being detected, so he doesn't try to penetrate it. He waits. At 0200 hours, the convoy passes through a narrow channel between two small islands. The destroyers have to spread out slightly to navigate the passage, opening a gap in the screen for just 12 minutes. Fluckey times his approach perfectly, bringing Barb up to periscope depth in the channel's center, directly in the convoy's path. "Make ready all tubes," he says calmly. "We're going to fire from inside the convoy." His crew has learned to trust him. But this is insane. He's positioning Barb in the middle of the formation, surrounded by targets. If anything goes wrong, if they're detected, if a torpedo malfunctions, if they can't escape quickly enough, the destroyers will tear them apart. But Fluckey knows something the Japanese don't. His Mark 18S won't betray his position. He can fire from point-blank range, gut the convoy from within, and slip away before anyone realizes where the attack came from. The first target appears in his periscope, a massive tanker, probably 16,000 tons. Behind it, a troop transport. Beyond that, another tanker. Fluckey starts firing. 10 Mark 18 torpedoes, launched in 70 seconds, spreading out toward targets on both sides of Barb. The torpedoes are running so close that Fluckey can hear them through the submarine's hull, a faint electric whine, almost musical. Then the explosions start. The first tanker erupts in flame, her cargo of aviation fuel igniting in a fireball that lights up the night sky. The troop transport takes 3 hits in rapid succession, her hull rupturing, water flooding into compartments packed with soldiers. The second tanker explodes so violently that the shockwave rocks Barb even underwater. Within 2 minutes, 3 ships are sinking, and a 4th is dead in the water, burning from stem to stern. The destroyers converge on the chaos, but they're converging on the wrong place. They're hunting in the wake of the explosions, assuming the submarine fired from outside the convoy. They never imagine it could be directly beneath them, already diving deep, slipping away as they chase ghosts. Fluckey takes Barb down to 300 feet and creeps away at 2 knots. Above him, he can hear the destroyer's propellers thrashing water, depth charges detonating in random patterns, sonar pings echoing uselessly. They're hunting an enemy that's no longer there. March 1944. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi stares at the map on his wall, watching as his staff updates it with the latest losses. In the past 3 months, American submarines have sunk more than 200 merchant ships and tankers in the waters around Formosa, the Philippines, and the South China Sea. The numbers are catastrophic. Worse than catastrophic, they're unsustainable. But what haunts Takagi isn't the numbers. It's the way the ships are dying. His destroyer captains report the same thing over and over. No warning, no torpedo wakes, no periscope sightings, just explosions appearing from empty water. Ships breaking apart without explanation. Some captains are starting to whisper that the Americans have developed some kind of invisible weapon. Takagi knows better. The Americans haven't developed invisible weapons. They've developed silent ones. And the Imperial Navy has no answer for them. A junior officer approaches hesitantly. "Sir, the convoy from Singapore is 2 days overdue. We must assume another one." Takagi doesn't turn from the map. "How many ships?" 11 merchants, 4 escorts. All lost? "We've received no transmissions." Takagi closes his eyes. 15 ships. Gone. Somewhere between Singapore and Manila. An American submarine, maybe more than one, had found them and killed them without leaving a trace. No distress calls. No survivors reporting what happened. Just silence. The junior officer clears his throat. "Sir, the ministry is asking for recommendations. How do we counter this threat?" "How do they counter it?" Takagi almost laughs. "How do you fight an enemy you can't see, can't track, and can't predict? The Americans are operating with impunity in Japanese home waters. Sinking ships faster than the shipyards can replace them. Every convoy that sails might not arrive. Every escort assignment might be a death sentence. Tell the ministry." Takagi pauses, choosing his words carefully. "Tell them we are studying the problem." It's the only answer he has. Because the truth that the Americans have achieved submarine supremacy, that Japan's merchant fleet is being systematically destroyed, that the supply lines keeping the empire alive are being cut one by one, is too terrible to speak aloud. October 24th, 1944. Palawan Passage, Philippines. Commander David McClintock commands USS Darter. And right now, he's watching the opportunity of a lifetime sail past his periscope. It's not a convoy. It's not a merchant fleet. It's the Imperial Japanese Navy's Center Force 5 battleships, 12 cruisers, and 15 destroyers steaming through the narrow passage toward Leyte Gulf, where American forces are landing on the beaches of the Philippines. This is the fleet that's supposed to destroy the American invasion. These are the warships Japan has hoarded, protected, kept in reserve for the decisive battle that will turn the tide of the Pacific War. And they're sailing directly into McClintock's patrol area. He keys the radio. USS Dace, his sister submarine, is patrolling nearby. "Pack this position. I have multiple heavy contacts. This is it." Commander Bladen Claggett in Dace doesn't need further explanation. Within 30 minutes, both submarines are in position, tracking the Japanese fleet as it steams through the passage in the pre-dawn darkness. The battleships are massive silhouettes like moving mountains against the stars. The cruisers form a protective screen around them. The destroyers probe ahead with sonar. It's the most heavily defended target either commander has ever seen. And they're going to attack it with Mark 18 torpedoes. McClintock chooses his target carefully, the heavy cruiser Atago, flagship of Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, commander of Center Force. She's steaming at 18 knots, flanked by 2 other cruisers, Maya and Takao. Taking down the flagship will throw the entire force into confusion. Make ready all forward tubes. Target is the lead cruiser. We'll fire 6. At 0532 hours, Darter fires. 6 Mark 18 torpedoes slip into the water, their electric motors whirring quietly as they track toward Atago. No wake, no sound. The destroyers scanning ahead with sonar detect nothing unusual. The cruiser sails on, unaware. 4 torpedoes hit within 10 seconds. The explosions tear through Atago's hull, flooding her engine rooms, ripping apart her magazines. Admiral Kurita is thrown from his chair on the bridge, scrambling through smoke-filled passages as his flagship begins to sink. The cruiser lists hard to port, water pouring into her wounds faster than her damage control teams can manage. 18 minutes after the first torpedo hit, Otago rolls over and sinks, taking 360 men with her. But McClintock isn't done. He's already reloaded and is lining up on a second cruiser. Takao. 2 more Mark 18S hit her stern, destroying her propellers and rudder. She's not sinking, but she's crippled, dead in the water, forced to limp back to Brunei, escorted by 2 destroyers that Center Force desperately needs. 4 miles away, Dace is firing on Maya. Claggett puts 4 torpedoes into her 1 in the forward magazine, 3 in her engine spaces. Maya explodes with such violence that the flash is visible from Darter's periscope. She sinks in less than 8 minutes, her hull torn open from bow to stern. In the space of 20 minutes, 2 American submarines have gutted Center Force's cruiser screen. 3 heavy cruisers gone or crippled. Admiral Kurita is in the water, swimming for his life, being fished out by a destroyer. The fleet that was supposed to win Japan's decisive battle is scattered, confused, and already bloodied before it even reaches the American landing beaches. And the Japanese still don't know where the attack came from. The destroyers race around, pinging frantically, dropping depth charges on empty water. Darter and Dace slip away in different directions, diving deep, their electric motors barely whispering as they escape the chaos they've created. October 25th, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. The next day, Center Force does reach the American landing beaches, but Kurita is shaken, his cruiser screen devastated, his confidence broken. When he encounters fierce resistance from American escort carriers and destroyers, tiny ships that should have been easy prey, he hesitates. He withdraws. The decisive battle Japan planned becomes a crushing defeat. Historians will argue for decades about why Kurita turned back. Some will say it was confusion. Others will point to the ferocious defense by American surface forces. But the submariners who were there know the truth. The battle was decided the night before, in the darkness of Palawan Passage, when 2 submarines with Mark 18 torpedoes took away Japan's will to fight. December 1944. Throughout the Pacific, by the end of 1944, the Mark 18 has become the primary weapon of the U.S. submarine force. More than 60 submarines carry them. The Mark 14, once the Navy's standard torpedo, is being phased out, relegated to rearguard patrols and training exercises. No submarine commander who has access to Mark 18S will voluntarily use anything else. The statistics tell a brutal story. In 1942, American submarines fired 442 torpedoes and sank 180 Japanese ships. In 1944, they fired 6092 torpedoes and sank 603 ships, more than 3 times as effective, with much of that improvement coming from the Mark 18's reliability and stealth. Japan's merchant fleet is dying. The tankers that once brought oil from the Dutch East Indies to fuel the Imperial Navy now rest on the bottom of the Pacific. The freighters that carried food, ammunition, and supplies to isolated garrisons are gone. Entire island bases are starving because the convoys that were supposed to supply them never arrived. And the Japanese still can't stop it. They've tried everything: tighter convoy formations, more escorts, coastal routes that stick close to air cover. Nothing works. The Mark 18S are too quiet, too reliable, too deadly. American submarines are operating with near impunity in Japanese home waters, sinking ships faster than the shipyards can build them. April 1945. East China Sea. Commander Richard O'Kane takes USS Tang on her 5th war patrol. She's carrying 24 Mark 18 torpedoes, and O'Kane intends to use every single one. Over the next 3 weeks, Tang will sink 10 ships, freighters, tankers, a submarine chaser, even a troop transport carrying reinforcements to Okinawa. Every torpedo will run true. Every hit will be devastating. But on the night of October 24th, 1944, ironically the same night, McClintock attacked Center Force O'Kane's, luck runs out. Not because of Japanese defenses, not because of depth charges or destroyers, because of a torpedo malfunction that has nothing to do with the Mark 18 itself. Tang fires her last torpedo at a transport. The weapon leaves the tube normally, but something goes wrong with its steering mechanism. Instead of tracking toward the target, it begins to curve. O'Kane watches through the periscope in horror as the torpedo completes a full circle and comes racing back toward Tang. "All back emergency," he screams, "but there's no time." The torpedo hits Tang's stern, the explosion tearing through the after torpedo room. The submarine sinks in seconds, taking 78 men with her. Only 9 survive, including O'Kane, who spends the rest of the war in a Japanese POW camp. It's a tragic end for one of America's most successful submarine commanders. But even in Tang's final patrol, the Mark 18S performed exactly as designed. 23 successful shots. 1 malfunction that was mechanical, not design-related. The weapon didn't betray its users the way the Mark 14 had. It gave American submariners the tool they needed to dominate the Pacific. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo Bay. When Japan surrenders, the statistics are undeniable. American submarines sank 178 Japanese merchant ships during the war, 5.3 million tons of shipping sent to the bottom. They also sank 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, and 11 cruisers. The submarine force represented less than 2% of the U.S. Navy's personnel, but accounted for 55% of Japan's maritime losses. And a significant portion of those kills, perhaps a third, perhaps more, came from Mark 18 torpedoes, the silent, wakeless weapons that allowed American submarines to attack from close range, fire multiple salvos, and escape before the enemy even knew they were there. The Japanese merchant fleet that entered the war with 6 million tons of shipping capacity ended with less than 2 million tons still afloat. The rest lay scattered across the Pacific floor, sent there by weapons that gave no warning, left no trace, and showed no mercy. Vice Admiral Takagi, who spent the war watching his convoy maps fill with red X's marking sunken ships, would later write, "We knew American submarines were hunting us. We knew they were effective. But we never understood, never fully grasped how completely we were outmatched until after the war. When we learned about the electric torpedoes, they were hunting us with weapons we couldn't detect, couldn't evade, and couldn't counter. We were dead before we knew we were in danger." Epilogue. The weapon that changed everything. The Mark 18 wasn't perfect. It was slower than steam-powered torpedoes. Its range was limited. The batteries were expensive and required careful maintenance. In cold water, performance degraded. In a straight comparison of specifications, the improved Mark 14 actually had better numbers on paper. But the Mark 18 worked. It worked reliably, consistently, and lethally. It gave submarine commanders confidence, something they'd lacked for 2 years of warfare. And most importantly, it was silent. That single characteristic, the absence of a wake, transformed submarine warfare in the Pacific. The Japanese fleet had laughed at American torpedoes when the Mark 14 was failing. They'd learned to spot the wakes, evade the attacks, and counterattacked the submarines that revealed their positions. They'd adapted to the threat and learned to minimize it. Then they saw what the Mark 18 could do, and they stopped laughing. By the time the war ended, Japan's merchant fleet was effectively extinct, strangled by an enemy that struck from the darkness without warning. The Mark 18 didn't win the Pacific War by itself, but it gave American submarines the weapon they needed to cut Japan's lifelines, starve its industries, and make victory inevitable. In the end, the Japanese fleet didn't laugh. They drowned, silently,